Well, good morning. Good to see you this morning. We do need to be in prayer. We do need to be in prayer for our kids and our teachers and all those that are involved in our schools, especially as they go back. But as a parent, I am reminded this weekend, it's the most wonderful time of year, is it not? Oh. I love them, but I'm happy to see them go for 6 hours a day. I wonder for you, how long has it been since you maybe uttered some words like these? What was I thinking? Or why does this bother me so much? Or how come I just can't get over this? Or I didn't realize the kind of hold this thing had on me. Those kinds of statements are reflective of an internal struggle, a battle that takes place within our soul. And maybe you know somebody, or maybe it describes you, or maybe you can think of back in a time in your own life when words that would describe you would be the following: out of control, reckless. Dangerous words that reflect a person maybe who's just a little bit crazy. I mean, maybe you got done with a conversation with somebody and you said to a friend or spouse, or they're crazy. You don't mean like funny kind of crazy, but more like serious and dangerous. This thing has really got to him or to her. Or maybe even more subtle than that. Maybe there's this sort of burning desire within you that you want to be happy. You thought your life would be sort of like this, and it's not turned out that way. And so you're on a relentless pursuit to be happy. Maybe you want to be successful, or if maybe I was kind of drop the microphone, if you will, into your soul, you would say, I just want to be loved. I want someone just to love me. I just want to be accepted. I want to be attractive. Sometimes in moments of clarity, you may just talk to yourself and say things like, what's the big deal with this, with you? And yet the reality is there's this war, this battle, this struggle that's going on. Sometimes it's just this sort of lure, if you will, and other times it looks like absolute lunacy. When the Bible talks about this internal drive that I'm describing as lure and lunacy, it uses the word idolatry. And today I want to talk about that lure and lunacy of idolatry through Exodus 32, one of really the best examples of the craziness and the consequences of misplaced desires that become deadly. This is the story of the golden calf. And Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians 10 that these sorts of stories are in the Bible in order that we might not desire evil as they did. So I don't want you to do this. I don't want you to read this as we go through it today, Exodus 32, and go, what a bunch of immature Israelites. What were they thinking, worshiping a golden calf? I don't want you to do that. Today what we're going to do is I want to show you Exodus 32, show you what happened, then I want to take kind of a step back, talk about, well, what is the deal with these idols? Why were idols and why are idols so appealing and attractive? And third, I want to make a bridge into, so what does this mean for us? What does this mean for you? In other words, I want you to think about why you do the things in your life that control you so strongly. So first, what happened in Exodus 32? The book of Exodus is not really just a collection of stories of Israel. It's a theological book designed to tell us something about God. There's a message there that's communicated sort of through this narrative. Exodus 32 marks sort of an abrupt shift from the previous chapters. I've actually spent a lot of my summer kind of happened to be reading through Exodus as I was sort of for me on what I was reading, and kind of studied my way through Exodus, and hence why we have the message we have today. And I was struck by all these sort of instructions regarding the tabernacle, really the fine and intricate details, from the color of the draperies to the kind of artifacts and accessories that are to be used inside the tabernacle, to even the robe and the very specifics all around that the priest is to wear. All of a sudden, we have this sort of huge slamming shift in chapter 32, where we see one of Israel's signature failures. And I want to remind you that if it probably need some reminding, maybe you haven't read through Exodus in a while, but a few chapters earlier in chapter 24, at the base of the mountain, after God spoke to them, Israel said this, "All that the Lord has spoken we will do, and we will be obedient." That's chapter 24. Chapter 32 is, "Make us gods because we don't know what happened to Moses." And that's an unbelievable fast shift from a pledge of allegiance to downright idolatry. And that's the story of the human heart. Today we see the challenge of idolatry expressed in this story of the golden calf. So verse 1. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered themselves together to Aaron and said to him, "Up, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, this man who brought us out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what's become of him." This is not a suggestion. This was probably a mob, a bit like a coup. A bunch of people come to Aaron and they say, "Moses has been gone for 40 days. We don't know what's going on. Apparently he's not coming back, so we need gods. Therefore, make us some gods." And Aaron concedes. Verse 2, Aaron said to them, "Take off the rings of gold that are in the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." And so he took all of this gold material. They brought it to Aaron. Verse 4, he received the gold from their hand, and he fashioned it with a graving tool and made a golden calf. So this calf was actually a familiar god in ancient Near East. It wasn't just sort of randomly chosen. The calf was viewed like a conduit to the world of gods. And they said, and the word there is likely referring to these people who sort of instigated this rebellious moment. They said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." So they point to this calf and say, "These are your gods." They didn't really think that the calf obviously had actually brought them out of Egypt, but rather that this calf is really kind of serving as a conduit to a God that they can no longer envision, who isn't speaking to them, whose main representative, Moses, is nowhere to be found. So Aaron's in a bit of a hard place here. Verse 5. When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron made a proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord." So here's what I think Aaron might be doing. The people are kind of out of control. They're worshiping a golden calf. And so Aaron tries to bring in elements of Yahweh worship into this thing. And he says, tomorrow's going to be a feast to the Lord. In other words, what's happening here is Israel's trying to pursue two paths at the exact same time. They're still trying to be God's people, Yahweh people, but they're also now worshiping this golden calf, and Aaron is trying to sort of straddle the fence, if you will, between these two positions. The challenge is this is not going to work. The feast of the Lord turns out to be a really bad scene. Verse 6 tells us, "And they rose up early the next day and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play." The word play is a loaded term. In the NIV, it renders the verse this way: "They sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in revelry." The Hebrew word for play or revelry is used to kind of describe Isaac's sort of sporting and flirtatious interaction with his wife Rebekah, which tipped off the king of Philistia that Isaac had lied about his relationship with Rebekah. It's also used by Potiphar's wife as an accusation against Joseph when he refused her advances. So when the Bible's talking about play, it's not talking about like kickball, Red Rover, that kind of thing, okay? There's something about this activity that's pushing the envelope. In other words, their idolatry is leading to a self-centered celebration and perhaps sensuality. So verses 7 to 10, kind of the whole scene now shifts over to God's perspective on all of this as to what's happening. So verse 7, "And the Lord said to Moses, 'Go down, for your people, whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt, have corrupted themselves. They've turned aside quickly out of the way I've commanded them. They have made for themselves a golden calf and have worshipped it and sacrificed to it.'" So God tells Moses what's happening, because obviously Moses can't see any of this and what's going on down there. And as a result, God is going to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. Verse 9, the Lord says to Moses, "I have seen this people, and behold, it is a stiff-necked people. Now therefore, let me alone, let my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, in order that I may make a great nation of you. In other words, God's going to press the reset button and start over, kind of like he did with Abraham. He's going to do that for Moses. That's how angry God is at this. Verse 11 is a great scene of compassionate servant leadership. Moses appeals to the Lord to not do that, citing his name, his reputation, the glory of God. In verse 14, the Lord relents from the disaster he was going to bring to Israel. Moses then begins to move down the mountain. Verse 15, he grabs the 2 tablets, the tablets that God had written, the tablets regarding the 10 commandments. He meets up with Joshua. They hear sort of the noise that's going on in the camp, and they come down to the base of the mountain. In verse 19, at the sight of the calf and the dancing, Moses understands why God is so angry. Verse 19, as soon as he came near the camp, he saw the calf and the dancing. Moses' anger burned hot, and he threw the tablets out of his hand and broke them at the foot of the mountain. This is a symbolic act. It's not just because he's upset, but the people have broken the covenant with their God, and it only took them 40 days. It has to be in Moses' mind and heart. He must have been thinking, are you kidding me? It was just 40 days ago that we were in this beautiful moment. We're thinking about the glory of God, and he's speaking, and you're trembling, and you're saying whatever he says we will do. It only takes 40 days. It's no wonder that he broke the tablets, because they had broken God's heart. They had broke God's law. They broke the covenant. And so Moses grabs the calf. He burns it, pulverizes it, spreads it on the water, makes the people drink it, and then he confronts Aaron. This is a sad, dark moment, and one that I would imagine Aaron would love to be cut out of this sort of section of the record. Verse 21, Moses says to Aaron, what did this people do to you, that you have brought such great sin upon them? Right? Just hear that sort of outrage. And Aaron says, let not the anger of my Lord burn hot. You know the people, they're set on evil. Right? You know the people, Moses, they're sinful, they're wicked. For they said to me, make us gods who shall go before us. And then he kind of throws this part in. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what's become of him. I can imagine Moses is thinking, are you really going to blame this on me? So I said to them, let anyone who have gold take it off. So they gave it to me. I threw it in the fire, and out came this calf. Like, what in the world, right? I mean, probably could have thought of a better excuse. We just had this gold and we just threw it in the fire and let's kind of see what happens. I'm pretty sure my kids would have said the exact same thing. Verse 25 provides the following summary. And when Moses saw that the people had broken loose, and notice this comment, for Aaron had let them break loose to the derision or ridicule of their enemies. Somewhere in your mind, just mark it down. I want you to think about this for a moment. If you're any position of spiritual leadership, like if you have children in your home, if you're a parent, if you're a small group leader, or part of your responsibility is to help people with the idols of their heart. Moms and dads, we have a very limited window to help our children with the idols of their heart. Because who in the world is going to talk to them about the idols of their heart when they turn 25? It's a parent's responsibility to say, look, I love you, but the fact of the matter is this is way too important to you. That you have an idol. It's coming out in not such a good way. And so part of the responsibility of parents, part of the responsibility of spiritual leadership is to talk to and speak into the issues of idols of the heart. Let's go back to our text. The result of this was that the Levites were called and they were instructed to go throughout the camp, and 3,000 people died, presumably those that were the leaders of this sort of insurrection. And the final element of the story is Moses' atonement that he seeks on behalf of the people. Verse 30, this is a very precious text. The next day, Moses said to the people, "You have sinned a great sin. And now I will go up to the Lord, and perhaps I can make atonement for your sin." So Moses returned to the Lord and said, "Alas, this people have sinned a great sin. They have made for themselves gods of gold. But now, if you will forgive their sin. But if not, please blot me out of your book that you have written." In other words, he's asking for his own life to be given. Moses becomes a bit of a type of Christ who will make atonement for his people, but God rejects that offer. He says, "Whoever has sinned against me, I will blot out of my book. But now go, lead the people to the place which I have spoken to you. Behold, my angel shall go before you. Nevertheless, in the day when I visit, I will visit their sin upon them." Then the Lord sent a plague on the people because they made the calf, the one that Aaron made. This is a story of God's discipline for idolatry. The lure of security, the lure of fulfillment surfaced in Israel's desire to make a god by their own hands and led them into spiritual lunacy. They're crazy, right? 40 days and suddenly they're panicked. They need a God. They feel insecure. They want control. And here are people who go from awe of worship and respect for who and what Yahweh is to outright rebellion. And listen to me, this is what idols will do to you. It'll make you swing from singing, "Hear us, O heaven." Open the blind eyes, and then tomorrow you're consumed with the desire to use the good things that God has given and use them to fill up this sort of aching hole within your heart. This is the lure, this is the lunacy of idolatry. And in case you think that this text is just about Israel, the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 10 reflects on stories like these. This is what he says. This is from 1 Corinthians 10. "Now these things took place as examples for us, that we might not desire evil as they did. Do not be idolaters, as some of them were. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. We must not indulge in sexual immorality, as some of them did. And 23,000 fell in a single day. We must not put Christ to the test, as some of them did and were destroyed by serpents, nor grumble, as some of them did and were destroyed by the destroyer. Now these things happened to them as an example, but they were written down for our instruction, on whom the end of the ages has come. Therefore, let anyone who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall." Meaning, don't you dare read Exodus 32 and go, "That's crazy. They're idol-worshiping Israelites. How stupid could they be?" The fact of the matter is, idols are still a big deal. What was I thinking? Why does this control me so much? How come I can't let go of this? Why does it grab a hold of me? Or if you live with somebody who's like this, in the back of your mind you're thinking, why can't they just get over this? Why does this have such a hold on them? Why does it have to be such a big part of their life? It's idolatry. I want to help you understand what idols are all about. You might think that idols were just something that plagues the Old Testament, but there's all kinds of idols, obviously, in our present day as well. And it would help you be able to identify present-day idols by understanding what the lure was, or the attraction was, of idols in the Old Testament. There's commentator Doug Stewart, who has a commentary on Exodus, and he has this article called "The Attractions of Idolatry," and I'm just going to summarize a few things here for you. First one is this: idols are involved with self-interest. Or maybe a better way to say it, the reason that we go to idols is because we're concerned about ourselves. Idols were never created without a self-centered concern. Idols were worshipped because of what they brought to the worshiper. There was a spiritual sort of quid pro quo, if you will. In the ancient Near East worldview, an idol served as a portal or a conduit to another world. Therefore, the worship of an idol was only a means to an end. The idol connected them to the spiritual world. But the basis of this relationship between the spirit world and the human world was the fact that the gods could do many things, but they could not feed themselves. So these gods had power over fertility and abundance of crops, but humans had the power to feed the gods. Therefore, the human-divine interaction was based on mutual self-interest. If a human fed the god, then the god was obligated to bless him or her in return. And so to them, this was the way that the universe just worked. And if you wanted any kind of a blessing or any kind of abundance, then you had better feed the gods. Idolatry was essentially about self-centered greed. By the way, Paul echoes this sentiment in Colossians 3 when he says, put off covetousness, which is idolatry. So underneath idolatry is a passion for self. Secondly, idols are incredibly convenient. In the ancient Near East, there was sort of no defined moral code. You could do whatever you wanted just as long as you then sacrificed to kind of balance out the scales. And so therefore, life essentially didn't have any ethical boundaries. The sum total of your religious life was just whatever you sacrificed to the gods. So as long as you could keep the gods happy by virtue of your sacrifices, you could kind of just live however you wanted. And so therefore, there was a huge disconnect between ethics and sacrifice. There were idols on sort of every hill and under every tree, so therefore it was very convenient. You didn't have to travel to Jerusalem, you didn't have to travel to some city. You just gave a sacrifice underneath a tree or over some hill, and it kind of wiped your slate clean. You could live however you wanted and just give sacrifice. You could live in both worlds. Third is that idol worship was normal, and that makes it really, really challenging. Idol worship was the established and settled way to live in the ancient Near East. It was so embedded into the culture that it would have been very countercultural and even illogical to think this way. If an Israelite had asked a Canaanite, how do you farm this land? The Canaanite would not only have told him about specific farming practices, but he would have also emphasized the need to sacrifice to Baal and Asherah. Worshipping the fertility gods was considered part of the laws of life. Idolatry was a normal part of the world. Monotheism was the strange view. So the people of the ancient Near East believed that there was multiple gods for multiple purposes throughout Israel's history. The problem was not that Israel denied Yahweh's existence. Everyone believed that Yahweh was God. The problem was the addition of other gods. It was the day-to-day allegiance to these practical gods that got Israel in a lot of trouble. Idolatry usually looked like Israel was trying to create a sort of a theological potluck and a little taste of every culture. They never really abandoned Yahweh. They just added things to the mix that were normal for their culture and that were practically reassuring. And then finally, the worship of idols was incredibly pleasurable. What the enemy did is he makes the worship of these gods fun, enjoyable, even sensual. Idolatry was tangible. You could actually see the golden calf. You could touch the golden calf. Can't see God. And so it felt like it was real because you could touch an idol. An idol, when you sacrificed to it, you gave it meat. And nobody in the ancient Near East would eat meat unless it was sacrificed to an idol. It was sacred. So whenever you ate meat, you also were sacrificing. And so therefore, there was an incentive. The more you eat, the more you sacrifice, the more you indulge, then because there's this incentive of the more that you eat, the more that you sacrifice. The same thing with drink. The more you drink, the more you sacrifice. Therefore, drunkenness and gluttony were celebrated because they were not only were they fun, but they also had spiritual implications to them. So it's no wonder the enemy links these two, and then you add a sexual component too. It was believed that fertility on earth was dependent upon fertility in the realm of the gods. It was believed that whatever happened on earth was also being mimicked or happened in heaven or happened in the realm of the gods. And therefore, as part of the worship event in regard to idolatry, there was sensual activity on earth in order to, in their minds, for sensual activity to happen in the realm of the gods, which then would produce fertility on earth. So you can imagine what happened. You think maybe that there's some bad stuff going on in our culture, and obviously there is, but For example, read through 2 Kings 23, and you'll see that in the middle of a reform, a king actually has to go through and cleanse the temple because the worship of Yahweh had become so intermingled with these idols that there were actually houses of cult prostitutes built around the Temple Mount area. Or Paul in 1 Corinthians 6 deals with the issue on sort of a secular setting where believers were visiting the temple Diana. And as part of that worship service, there was sort of this immoral activity. And they thought, crazy as it is, but they thought it had no impact whatsoever on their soul. So you can't seriously tell me that we have no idols today. Can you tell me that there's nothing in our culture that's both pleasurable and normal and convenient and self-interested? Absolutely not, right? The enemy has just simply changed the orientation. He's changed the object of the idol. But idolatry as it existed in the Old Testament still very much exists today. What the enemy does, church, is he weaves together sort of this deadly cocktail, if you will, of self-concern, convenience, peer pressure, and pleasure. All he needs people to do, they don't have to abandon their belief in God. They don't have to abandon their belief in Jesus. They don't have to claim not to be a Christian. All they have to do is just add other practical, sensual, self-centered, normal, pleasure-seeking, convenient gods in their life. And he's got us. Idolatry was never about the idol. What happened at the base of Mount Sinai was never really about the golden calf. Instead, what it was about was what people thought the idol would give them. And that's our issue. It doesn't matter what it is. That is the controlling factor in your life. There are things that we pursue that give us security, give us identity, give us pleasure, give us power, make us feel whole. Those things, apart from the glory of God, can become dominant, can become addicting, and can ruin your life. The lure of idolatry is that these things seem so right, and your heart says you need this. And the lunacy of it is that it's a deadly trap that leads to despair. That's the matter of idolatry. I'm going to maybe just translate it now to our world, really simply and plainly. What does this mean? I'm going to give you a few things just to think about. First, church, I want you to understand that an idol can simply be anything. You need to look at life through a lens of absolutely anything can serve as an idol in our lives. It can be something that just serves as an alternate to God. An idol is anything that's more important to you than God. Anything that absorbs your heart, your imagination, more than God. Anything you ask to give you what only God can give you. There are no limits to what can become an idol. You and I can make an idol of anything. Secondly, sometimes people make the mistake of thinking that idols are only bad things. And that actually couldn't be further from the truth. More often than not, idols are good things that have gone bad. We take the gifts that God has given us, the things that are meant to be conduits to turn us back to Him, and we end up using those things and taking those things, and they become too important to us. They become part of our identity, our happiness, and when they're removed, suddenly despair and hopelessness sets in. We've seen the bad things, right? We've all seen things like drugs and alcohol become idols. We've seen money and power and possession become idols. But there's the other side, right? Maybe people who pride themselves on living frugally or under a certain standard of living, or affirmation can become an idol. Recreation, a business, kids can become an idol. Third, an idol becomes apparent when it becomes ultimate. It's anything that you would have in your life that's so important to you that if you had to part with it by your choice or not, it's almost as though you feel like life isn't worth living. It's something so fundamental to your happiness, to your identity, to your being other than God. It's like you can't live without this. And it's not intellectually you understand it, but emotionally you feel this way. I've got to have this. Maybe how come they don't like me? Or why won't my kids respect me? Or how come I can't be successful? Or how come I can't have the body that I've always wanted? How come I can't? You fill in the blank. And all of those passions, all those pursuits are all trying to fill a heart that will never be satisfied, will never be filled. And it's exactly what Israel was pursuing at the base of the mountain. Fourth is idols offer us promises that simply are not true. Idols promise us lies. The lure of the idol is this script: you'll be happier with me. You need me. You'll feel safe with me. You deserve me. And ultimately, those promises can then turn very dark if it's taken away. The script will be, life isn't worth it without me. You're better off dead than to live without me. And that's a lie. Right? Do you see the trap of the enemy? Do you know what the solution to all of this is? I've seen this happen to many people. And for those of you who right now are in the middle of maybe running a bit of a rat race, and you're just kind of running, and you've tried relationships and jobs, and you've tried different locations, you've tried all sorts of things. Maybe it's even substances in your life or other things to sort of squelch this internal issue within you. And in the midst of that, Jesus says this: "Come to me, all you are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." The beautiful message of the gospel is that Jesus is the one who can come and give you the identity and the hope and the security and the rest that you really need. And the offering today of the gospel is this: that if you try and set your identity, your fulfillment, your hope from anything other than God, it just won't work. You can only find that in a relationship with Him. And for those of you who know Christ and you still feel this tension with idols like we all do, you just need to realize that you live in a world full of potential idols, and your guard needs to be up, and you need to be looking around and saying, you know what, that was really good. That made me feel good for a second, but that isn't God. I really enjoyed that moment, but it's not an ultimate. And you've got to be conscious of the more and more drive that happens in the human soul. And the more and more drive that happens, absent of God, is a more drive that leads to despair and ultimately ruin. Idolatry is trying to sort of wring out of people and power and money and sex and affirmation and position and children and marriage and even ministry what can really only come from the good news that's found in Jesus. So my question that I'm going to leave you with isn't if you have idols. I know people well enough. It's not if. My question is, where are those idols, and how big of a control do they really have over you? My caution, my plea to you today is that you would understand that there is a lure and a lunacy when it comes to idolatry. And for some of you, the message from God's word today is simply this: wake up. These idols, this thing that you want, it's going to ruin your life, and you won't ever be happy and you won't ever be satisfied apart from running to Jesus. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, Jesus said, and I will give you rest. Let's pray. Father God, we feel the tension of this issue because there are so many good things in this world that can so quickly become God things. So help us. Help us right now before we end this service today, Lord. I just want to give you a moment, because part of the problem with our culture is that we don't stop and think. We don't stop. So I'm inviting you right now just to ask yourself this question: what is it that's really controlling me? And I invite you, in the quietness of this moment, for you to say, Lord, I need to turn from, and just fill in that blank. I need to turn from allowing blank from controlling me anymore. Even though you've gone back and back and back 100 times in your lifetime, maybe today would just be another moment for you to say, Lord, I want you. I don't want myself anymore. I'm so tired of the damage that these idols create. Maybe you just say, Lord, would you help me? Help me find my identity in you. Help me find my security, my safety in you. Help good things, Lord, not become God things. Lord, help us to get off this crazy treadmill that we get on. And thank you that we can run to Christ, that we can run to Jesus who can meet all of our needs. I pray this in your name. Amen.